struggles between the church hierarchy and the religious orders. These struggles would have further importance in the 19th century, if you're familiar with the secularization movement. The second topic last week was the impact of the Dutch wars and the Moravians, which comprised the main obstacles and setbacks to the development of the church in the Philippines in the 17th and 18th centuries. Today, we will listen to Dr. Sophia Marco and Ms. Josefti Nito, who will discuss indicators of maturity of the Philippine church, particularly aspects of religious life in the pueblo, the production of devotional literature, the development of native clergy, and the participation of natives in the missionary work, which extended to other areas. We are happy to inform you that the session this morning will be live streamed on the CBCP YouTube channel, Faith Watch. So let me introduce the first speaker. Dr. Sophia Marco teaches undergraduate courses in Philippine history and Christian civilization. She has a PhD from the University of the Philippines, Diliman. She has done research on religious movements, Filipino soldiers, and the Guardia Civil in the late 19th century. Before we start today's lecture, I would like to inform the audience that we will be having a 5-minute break around 11 o'clock after the first lecture. And we will end the lectures today around 11:45, so earlier than the past weeks, and proceed directly to the open forum, which will end at 12. Participants who wish to ask questions may type their questions in the chat box. We will enable the chat function at 11:45 for you to write down their questions. And those who can't stay on may write down their questions on the evaluation form that we will send to you at the end of the session. The speaker or other members of the history department will answer your questions via email. So without further ado, let me call on Dr. Sophia Marco.
Morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes. So I'm going to share my screen now. The session for today is about the chapter 7 of the book of Father Schumacher. The title of the chapter 7 is The Established Church, 1620 to 1760. Josefti Nito and I will be discussing the 1650s to the 1760s. By this time, the Filipinos were moving beyond basic knowledge of the faith to incarnating the faith and making it part of their own identity. And the illustration I used here is by Jose Honorato Lozano. It is of the Quiapo Church and the procession of the Nazarene, as Jose Honorato Lozano probably witnessed it in the 1840s. So this is much later than the time frame which Josefti and I will talk about today, but that's the illustration that I was able to find. Now that we are in the 5th webinar in this series, let's have a quick review of the ideas and developments from the previous webinars. Since we're already in the 5th, so I'm so happy that the people continue to show up in this 9-part. There are 9 webinars in this series. From the beginning, the missionaries persuaded people in scattered settlements to transfer into more compact communities. This is to enable them to receive religious instruction and to receive the sacraments. So the Spanish early on, the Spanish missionaries observed that the inhabitants of our islands, our ancestors, tended to settle in scattered communities, either along rivers or coastlines, and also in the uplands. So to enable them to receive regular religious instruction, that would mean persuading these people, our ancestors, to settle into more compact communities. And this is precisely the initial challenge of the missionaries. This process called reduction went on for the whole Spanish colonial regime. And these are the numbers that Dr. Dumol shared with us in the first webinar. He showed us that you see the growth of this settled communities and development into townships happened in Luzon at um, at an earlier and a faster pace. So if you look at the 16th century, you have 82 towns. 17th century, 102 towns were founded, and 18th century, 113 towns were founded. So this on the right side, the 17th and 18th centuries, this is what Schumacher refers to as that what is called the maturing church, or that the church is getting more adherents and is being more assimilated into native culture. Now, that was true for Luzon, but look at the Visayas. In the 17th century, there were only 19 towns, and in the 18th century, there were only 50 towns across the Visayas. So that's why Schumacher made some adjustments in the time framing in his later work, which is Growth and Decline. In his earlier work, he tended to put the established church at 1620. Then later on, he said, let's move it to 1650 at a later date, and qualifying that, referring more to Luzon rather than the Visayas, because the Visayas had their own challenges, mainly from the Muslim raids and other challenges also, like lack of personnel among the missionaries. The earlier period was also marked by the struggle for justice, especially by the missionaries, and more particularly by the Bishop Salazar, the first bishop of the Philippines. And precisely in the Synod of Manila, he insisted that very stringent legal and moral standards be placed on the behavior of the colonized agents of colonization. And precisely he one of the rules that the Synod of Manila came up with was that tribute can be collected on natives who had been converted to the faith. Taxation without religious instruction is tyranny. So tribute should not be collected from people who are not in the process of being Christianized. Dr. Dumol also brought up the idea that it is that the arrival of Bishop Salazar, and also the holding of the Synod of Manila, wherein the ideas of Justicia, Katawiran, and Katarungan were in a way developed among natives, because number one, even when Bishop Salazar just arrived, there was a bunch of Principalia or elite natives who approached him and brought to him many complaints about the behavior of the alcaldes mayores and encomenderos. And precisely they were discussing with Salazar how unjust was the behavior of these colonial agents, and Salazar went about immediately trying to remedy these problems. So from the beginning, the missionaries laid down stringent requirements for Filipinos asking for baptism. They were required to memorize the Doctrina Christiana. They were questioned about what they memorized. They were required to conform to standards of Catholic morality, which is to renounce polygamy, ritual drinking, and usury. This is from an essay of Father Schumacher, and he was pointing out to the fact that as much as possible, the missionaries really did not want to baptize people who were not yet prepared for baptism. And also here, I just wanted to put this illustration here of Arte de la Lengua Tagala, just a sample of the many dictionaries that the missionaries had to prepare, and evidence of their effort to learn the language, and also evidence that they had native intermediaries who were helping them learn this language, and collaboration of some of the natives was really so crucial in the spreading of our faith. Just wanted to put here the seal of the Augustinian order, with the heart, the bishop's mitre, and supposed to be the spears or arrow piercing the heart, which is the heart on the book. The conversion of the Datu contributed to persuade people to follow him, but there were no mass baptisms as happened among the Germanic tribes in Europe. Filipinos were not converted by the sword like the 8th century Saxons, who were offered the choice of life or death by Charlemagne. Some missionaries rejected the presence of armed men in missionary expeditions, even for security purposes. 2 webinars ago, Dr. Camacho and Josefti also brought up the idea of the assistance of several prominent natives, and among them were Pedro Puaneg, was very famous in helping out the Agustinians in Bantay, Ilocos, and also in Cagayan Valley, Doña Luis Balinan, a member of the family of principals. She carried on the assistance of her deceased brother and rendered support to the church of her town and was a teacher and guide to her people. And these were the kind of collaborators that the missionaries have, especially in trying to convince the natives to move into more compact settlements and to listen to the missionaries and to go regularly to religious instruction and to the sacraments. Last meeting, Dr. Mesquida had a lot to cover. In fact, he had a lot of notes and quotes, because he was covering 2 chapters in the book of Father Schumacher, which were the obstacles and setbacks to evangelization caused by the Dutch wars and the Muslim raids, and the conflict between government officials and church authorities, and also conflicts between the bishops and religious orders. So you can see that Dr. Mesquida's topics were really all these obstacles to conversion, whether external, or the violence, the wars, the Muslim raids, or internal, were among the fighting among the Spanish and the bad example of even the ministers of the faith. And I wanted to include here the building of the galleons was really such a taxing, was taxed the natives so much, and also the cutting of the trees for the galleons. These were very, it ended up being quite oppressive to the natives. Among the many things that Dr. Mesquida read out to us last webinar was this quote from Pedro Murillo Velarde, and I wanted to take off from this quote, and I will read it to you slowly now, and read that we can read along. In Ilocos and Pangasinan, they, the Dutch, wanted to make war rather with deceitful stratagems than with power and ball, emphasizing to the natives the harsh slavery in which they were groaning under the Spanish yoke, the hardships they were suffering. They made the offer that if they would renounce their vassalage to the King of Spain, they would be given full relief, treating them as friends. This proposal they considered to be the fiercest kind of warfare that they could make to conquer the Indios. The Dutch were hoping to win over the Filipinos in Ilocos and Pangasinan. But they deceived themselves, is what Murillo Velarde said. For when the Indios learned that they were heretics, this was sufficient for them to prefer the spiritual goods they possessed in being Catholics, in spite of the greater hardships they had to suffer, to whatever material alleviation they would offer them, to the detriment of their religion. And this is what the Father Velarde said. The appreciation which the Filipino Indios have for their religion is so great that to maintain it, they suffer even the heaviest yoke and sacrifice all their material interests and even their lives with joy, readiness, and pleasure. Blessed be God, who so strengthens them. So these are the incommensurable parts of history wherein, of course, we look at the evidence, we look at accounts, we look at the cultural milieu. But there, I think even this Jesuit chronicler really, he himself is puzzled at and mind-boggled at the fidelity of quite a good number of Indios who are willing to adhere to their faith in spite of all the disadvantages this may bring. I also wanted to share, before going to the topic of the chapters that I covered for this webinar, I wanted to share this data which I got from Baron Robertson, and Baron Robertson got it from a book by the Jesuit Father Algue, and Jesuit Father Algue got it from this guy, Fray Juan Francisco de Antonio. And it's a general summary of souls, reckoning only the natives that were reduced to Christianity throughout the archipelago of Filipinas in 1735. So this is the end of the period Josefti and I are covering for today. So you can see here the statistics. In 142 villages in charge of the seculars, throughout this archipelago, there are 131 souls. These are the summary of souls. So 131,279 souls. Cows, Agustinians in more than 150 villages. So that's number 241,806. Order of St. Dominic in 51 villages, 89,750. Society of Jesus in 80 villages, 170,000. Augustinian Recollects in 105 villages, 63,149 since they came a bit later. Descalced Franciscans in 63 villages, 141,196. So those are the numbers. So you can see with the numbers of a little less than 2 centuries of evangelization, you can see that you can figure out that to be able to reach this number, you really need the cooperation of natives in many ways. What did Father Schumacher see as indicators of a more mature stage of growth in Christianity in the Philippines? That's the question for today. In his book, Growth and Decline, Father Schumacher made some qualifications in his earlier periodization of readings in Philippine church history. Because in that earlier work, he said the church was substantially established in most lowland areas by 1620. But precisely the qualification is that this was only true in Luzon, and the evangelization is quite uneven. So the missionary priest was based in the cabecera, and he visited Christians outside of the town. And systematic parish life had variations in depth and instruction in fullness of religious practice. So that actually, as Dr. Dumal explained to us in the first meeting, the town is not a small territory. It can be very it can extend to a great distance, and the center of the town where the church was can be quite far from the other residents of the town who can be quite scattered, and the priest still has to precisely visit them to be able maybe to actually to administer last sacraments or even convince them to come to mass. So the general periodization of Schumacher for this period is 1570 to 1650, the period of the first evangelization, 1650 to 1700, the maturing church. And precisely, he is saying that it's a maturing church because the missionaries now can go and have to start doing additional religious instruction to make it deeper, because they're responding to changing needs and opportunities for a greater penetration of the faith and its wider extension. So the people who have received baptism are now there's a second generation now, or that first generation is already deepening in their faith, and they want to know more and they want to practice the faith with more devotion, and they need more material for that. And then 1700 to 1768, we have the full blossoming of the church, as we will see later on. The maturing church, and these are the indicators, a deeper religious formation of those already evangelized and baptized. Opening of new regions for primary evangelization, and increasing participation of Filipinos themselves in the work of the missionaries. The deeper religious formation, the main indicator of this is that there's a growing number of works which provide more substantial explanation of Christian belief. These are not just basic doctrine, but rather they are further explanations or explicaciones and sermons. There were also translations of the European religious classics like Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis, Guia de Pecadores, and Memorial de la Vida Cristiana by Luis de Granada. Missionaries wrote books for those Filipinos who wish to deepen their spiritual life. So now, people are going more into the spiritual reading to know more about how to struggle for holiness, not just basic beliefs. So you have the production of a lot of prayer books and other materials to understand the faith better. Well, I just put here a novena to the Holy Name of Jesus, Santísimo Nombre de Jesus, and also this booklet for the Confraternity of Nuestra Señora de Consolación, which is of the San Agustin, Saint Augustinian friars. And this is a dictionary of the Lengua Bisaya. So the creation of all these works actually this author, Isaac Donoso, he recognized the production of all these, the dictionaries, the sermons, explicaciones, and so many other kinds of literature. He saw this as an effort that is a humanistic revolution. His terminology, he used the term humanistic revolution because this period in the Philippines, the 1600s and the 1700s, was a period of creativity that saw the printing of many books in Latin and Spanish produced within an Asian context. It's a very peculiar to the milieu in which the Filipinos found themselves, and the missionaries also found themselves at the time. Isaac Donoso pointed out that all these works could be part of an exceptional literary corpus that participated in the humanistic revolution here in the Philippines. Among these developments were the creation of the printing press and the foundation of the university in the Philippines. So that's actually the next thing that we're going to mention as part of the evidence that the faith is beginning to take root and the missionaries are already thinking about these long-term big projects. So first of all is making the two residential colleges for the sons of Spaniards. First for the Spaniards, of course, that's the mentality of the time. This is the 1600s, so of course, just let's educate first the Spaniards, a few Spaniards that come to the Philippines. But eventually, in the course of the 17th century, the sons of natives began to be admitted into San Juan de Letran and San Jose as capistas or working students who performed duties of waiters, porters, and mass servers. So here, and from the Jesuit annual letter, I'll read it to you. There are also being educated in the residential college of San Jose a number of young women of the Pampanga nation. They usually number more than 60, counting their slaves. Some of them are from the first families of the region whose parents send them here, receive a Christian education, and pay generously for their sustenance. So these Pampanga students they come with their slaves and their parents pay for their education in these places of San Juan de Letran and San Jose. San Juan de Letran run by the Dominicans and San Jose run by the Jesuits. And then I wanted to just include this illustration by Jose Honorato Lozano of the Reales de Manila on the left, in green, a student of Santo Tomas, in the middle, a student of Letran, and in the right side, a student of San Jose. But these are only in the 1840s. On the expiration of his temporary grant in 1645, Santo Tomas obtained through King Philip IV a pontifical charter as a university through a bull of Pope Innocent X. So in this chapter, Schumacher has a lot of information about at what point the colleges began and at what point the grants were formally given and stuff like that. So the dates are quite a lot. But anyway, eventually the university degrees would be granted by the University of Santo Tomas. But as you see here, the granting of this charter soon led to another of the interminable disputes between San Ignacio, San Jose, and Santo Tomas, the latter arguing that the former could no longer grant university degrees. But San Ignacio also received a series of papal and royal privileges and continued to grant degrees. So between these two institutions of higher education, we have a lot of competition, whether who's granting the degrees, who's supposed to have had the charter and all of that. But anyway, in the end, one of the Jesuits had to be transferred to the Archbishop of Manila because the Jesuits got expelled from the Philippines in 1768. However, before they were expelled, when the shares of law were opened in the two universities in the 1720s, Filipinos were almost immediately admitted to study law on the university level. By the 1780s, the Dominican rector would defend the right of the university to admit non-standards to advanced degrees before the audiencia. His main argument was, according to the divine scriptures, we are all equal. So you can see that actually there are several institutions. In this chapter, Father Schumacher will discuss several institutions in which the people of different races will be able to mingle. And one of them, of course, was the university. Apart from the concern for higher education, there's concern for basic education. That's why you can see that in this Augustinian for parish priest, it says here, Práctica del Ministerio, que siguen los religiosos del Orden de Nuestros Padres San Agustín en Filipinas. So you can see here that that the parish priests were required to establish schools for the children. The parish priests, in fulfillment of their duty, are obliged to procure by all means and methods possible, and if necessary, by means of the royal justices, that all the villages, both cabeceras and visitas, shall have schools, and that all the boys attend them daily. They should try to maintain schools for girls, which shall be held in the house of teachers, where they shall learn to read and pray. So you see, there's this intention to educate the young, the children. As early as 1731, you have this formal instructions to parish priests that they should educate the young. The thing is, if that was not happening so in a widespread manner, it's because of the lack of personnel and lack of resources, not because it was not intended. The intention was to really educate the young people and even the girls, because some people may think that the girls were not minded, but actually they were. Here in the 1731 instruction for the parish priests. However, the schools did not lead to widespread knowledge of Spanish, but the king wanted Spanish to be taught. Again, the teaching of the Spanish language was something also quite matter for a lot of contention. But you see, here in 1868, the king was very clear that he wanted people to learn Spanish. That all the bishops and all the bishops of the Indies give orders in their dioceses to the parish priests to the effect that they, by using the most mild means, they dispose and direct all the Indians be taught the Spanish language and be taught the Christian doctrine in that language. So 1686, that is the instruction from Charles II, na dapat people are taught in Spanish. However, that did not happen, as you can figure out. And then, he also wanted that natives learn Spanish because of not only religious reasons, but also civic reasons here. Moreover, by this means, also it will follow that the vexations practiced on the Indios will cease in whole or in greater part, and they will be able to make their complaints directly to their superiors without making use of interpreters who, being bribed, change the translation. So you can see here that it was a concern to enable natives to make complaints to superiors, whether complaints about anybody, I guess, about their missionary or about their other officials, native officials, or even the other Spaniards who they might know, or even their fellow Filipinos at the time. The thing is, the teaching of Spanish did not become widespread because of the realities of lack of resources and a lack of personnel. So this is the letter 1689. I think it will be a very difficult proposition to teach Spanish to the children because it is a rare schoolmaster who can teach in our language, no matter how capable he is in other respects. So it's the reality of the Philippine setting that we don't have teachers who know Spanish. Few Spanish come to the Philippines. Most of them just stay in Manila. So, and to whom will the Filipinos speak Spanish? So that did not happen. That there was any school system at all was due entirely to the work of the missionaries and was carried on without government help. Only in the 19th century would the government attempt to create a government-supported system of schools and begin to make Spanish the medium of instruction on the primary level. So this is just an illustration of how a photo much later already of how it was in the Jesuit schools. Care for the sick. Apart from the education, what also greatly expanded was the care for the sick and other charitable institutions. The hospital for the natives, opened by the Franciscan Fray Juan Clemente, was the precursor of a series of hospitals destined for all classes of society and all the various peoples dwelling in Manila. And this is the seal of the Franciscans with the arm of Saint Francis and of Jesus crossed over each other. And here's the letter of the Archbishop Garcia Serrano to the king in 1662, enumerated hospitals that were functioning in the Philippines in 1662. Among these were the Royal Spanish Hospital for Spanish. It could accommodate 70 to 100 men, mostly soldiers. The Hospital of the Misericordia, 80 to 100 sick men. It had a separate area for 12 to 20 women. Hospitals for Indios, 100 to 150 sick. It is under the charge of the superintendent appointed by the governor. Hospital of San Gabriel for Sanglis, Christian or pagan. Hospital of Los Baños, it was in debt and the superintendent in charge was appointed by the governor. The better provisioned hospitals were the ones supported by the Confraternity of the Misericordia. The members of the Confraternity of the Misericordia included the leading citizens of Manila. This is from the state letter, from the same letter of Archbishop Serrano. When he was enumerating the hospitals, he was also talking about the Confraternity of the Misericordia, and this is the nature of their organization. It has 200 brothers, and every year 12 of these are chosen, called brothers of the Board of Accounts. They, together with the Hermano Mayor, have charge of the government of the confraternity. They beg alms 2 days of every week and bring together whatever they get from the source and from the bequests left by most of the dying. They ordinarily spend each year more than 12,000 pesos, which includes 3,600 of income that was bequeathed to them by certain persons. So you can really see that this Misericordia is an institution that gathers funds from everywhere, including, I think, profits from business, and they channel it to the poor and to the religious orders. They spend this for the ordinary support and relief of self-respecting poor men and women of good life, for the poor of the prison, whose suits they urge, in helping many girls and sheltered in the College of Santa Potentiana, for the support of certain collegians who study in the College of Santo Tomas and in that of San Jose, providing for the marriage of orphan girls, and for the support of the hospital built by them where slaves are treated. So you can see that the work of the confraternity of the Misericordia is quite extensive, and our colleague Dr. Miskida actually did his dissertation on this organization. Another indicator of the maturing church is the extent of evangelization. So the Dominicans tried to expand beyond the Pangasinan. Yan. So beyond Pangasinan, they were trying to move into the uplands. And then this is a map of Cagayan, a very beautiful map of Cagayan, wherein you can see how the building of towns can be possible. And that's the way the Dominicans, that's what the Dominicans were doing for many centuries, actually for a century already in Cagayan by the time this map was made. So 2 centuries already. And this is the Cagayan River. The Recollects arrived in 1606 and worked along the coast from Cagayan de Oro to Caraga, but they were hindered by raids. So you have them in the northern Mindanao. And then the Jesuits also tried to evangelize Zamboanga and the Marianas. Even in the early days of Christianization, sodalities and confraternities had been organized among Spaniards or Filipinos who aspired to something more than fulfilling their minimum obligations of the faith. The Jesuits promoted for this purpose the Congregación Mariana. So the sodality of the Virgin Mary was promoted by the Jesuits, and you can see how these confraternities were really the organizations in which the practice of the faith were very much promoted and gained widespread support. And then here, Labor Evangelica by Father Colin. The Congregación de Indios has been erected and has progressed less in its fashion than that of the Spaniards, striving to match it with the emulation. They have distinguished themselves in attracting Indios, even those who are not congregantes, to make their confessions at our residence. As a result, we can scarcely take care of all who come for lack of confessors. These Indios of ours are so well known and outstanding in all the islands that the other Indios ordinarily call them in their own language Tagalangit, which means Indios of heaven. So you can see here with the confraternities, you can see the way the Indios are already internalizing and taking the faith very seriously. They're organizing all these prayer activities and also charitable works and also care for the sick and the dying. So in these congregations, and the chroniclers themselves are quite amazed at the way the Indios are embracing faith. How about natives in religious orders? As we can figure out, no Indian priests appear to have been ordained before the 18th century. This depended in part on the opening of higher education to Indios. A few are known to have been admitted to the religious orders as lay brothers. The first known was Martin Sancho, a Pampangueño, admitted to the Society of Jesus in 1593. He was sent to Rome for his novitiate but died shortly after his return to the Philippines. One whose life is known was Fray Marcelo de San Agustin, who was alive in 1690 but must have been admitted early in the century. So there's this account of who this person is from Gaspar de San Agustin in Conquistas de las Islas. This is his description of this brother. We have in our order a brother named Fray Marcelo de San Agustin, a native of this town of Malate. He can be considered the crown of the Tagalogs for his rare virtue and for how well he has served the convent of Manila in various offices. For all these, God has given him ability, for he is the most skillful organist known among the Indios, who are in general very skillful musical instruments. He is a composer and master of the chanters and minor sacristan. He has made and written many books for the choir. Above all, he is a great servant of God. He has brought up in the convent from a small child and still is alive today. Though burdened with years, his parents were principals, and the place where the church and the sacristy of the convent of Manila are at present were houses and lands of his grandfather. So I was figuring out maybe because this is the compound of San Agustin in Manila, and maybe this person his says here his there were the houses and lands of his grandfather. Maybe his grandfather gave it to the San Agustinian order. So that seems to be what we are told here. There was greater Filipino participation in evangelization, and apart from those lay brothers, you have what is called donados. It's an intermediate status which is neither canonical, religious, nor simple lay persons. For example, the Franciscan donados did not receive habits, but the Dominicans did. The general practice among Jesuits is not clear, but San Vitores received Felipe Sonson by giving him a habit. So San Vitores was a Jesuit priest who was assigned to be a missionary in Guam, and he was martyred there. And his famous companion is Pedro Calungsod. Brother Marcos Cruz, a Tagalog, was taught the language to San Vitores in Taytay and later accompanied him to his missions to the Mangyans. And Brother Felipe Sonson, an ardent volunteer missionary to the Marianas. So you can see all these donados. At least these are the recorded names. So I think Father Schumacher wanted to mention them precisely so that you can draw out whatever scattered information are of these people who were cooperating with the missionaries. And of course, Pedro Calungsod was martyred along with Father San Vitores in the Marianas. Then the last part of this presentation is about institutions for religious women. Institutions where Filipino women were excluded from full participation in religious life. But Native and Chinese mestizo women managed to create what was its equivalent in all but name and law to the Beaterio movement beginning the late 17th century. A beaterio was a community of women voluntarily living in a common life devoted to pious exercises. It had no official canonical status in the church as a convent of nuns of a religious order. So actually, there was already by the mid 1600s, you have coming to the Philippines the Monasterio de Santa Clara, but that was only for Spanish girls. And in fact, many of the Spanish males were quite dismayed by the foundation of the Monasterio de Santa Clara in Manila because they said, how will we look for wives if this monasterio is here and decreasing the number of prospects we have? Now, what about those Filipino women who were quite eager to also live a similar kind of life? They were prohibited, and they were, even if they were asking and they were pleading with their spiritual director that we want to also live a life of sanctity in community and in celibacy. They said no. They were told no, no, that's not for you. However, the Filipino women were quite insistent, and among the actually there are several efforts to found their own communities, and one of the most famous and prominent was this one of the House of Recogidas, which was under the auspices of the Jesuit order. So you can see here how um, in 1684, the House of the Recogidas began to be formed at the back of our College of Manila. Because of this fact, and because these women frequently attend our church to hear Mass, to confess, to receive communion, to make the exercises, and to perform other acts of devotion, they are commonly known as the Beatas de la Compañía. So here you can see here a report in 1756 about this Beaterio, Casa de Recogimiento de Indias, denominado de los Jesuitas. So you can see that under the auspices of the Jesuits. The thing is, the Jesuits were just their spiritual directors, but they actually governed themselves. The founder of this house of recollection was Ignacia de Espiritu Santo, a Chinese mestiza of Binondo. As a girl of 21 years, seeing her parents wished her to marry, she determined to become a beata in the Beaterio of Santo Domingo. So, 21 years old, that was a very young age, and she decided already that, oops, she's not going to get married, and she wants to dedicate her life in the Beaterio of Santo Domingo. The thing is, amazingly, she went to spiritual direction to a Jesuit priest, and she ended up organizing her own community under the auspices of the Jesuits. And then there's a very long account that was reproduced by Father Schumacher in his book, but I'll just read that ending paragraph. Mother Ignacia, the founders of this house of retirement, died on 10th of September in 1748. She was a truly valiant woman, for she not only overcame great difficulties which she met in this foundation from the beginning, even to the end, but she overcame with extraordinary constancy three kinds of indolence, very difficult to overcome, that natural to the country, that co-natural to her sex, and that which is deeply inborn in her race. So, and it's on the right side, you can see here the Reglas y Constituciones. This is the first published constitution of this Beaterio de la Compañía. She was mortified, patient, devout, spiritual, zealous for the good of souls. She was so humble that she proved it in what I believe to be the greatest way in this matter, by insisting on abdicating the government of that house without letting herself be overcome by that desire to command, which, like a cancer proper to this region, corrupts everything from the cedar to the hyssop. She was honored at her burial, which was in our church, by some ecclesiastics and Spaniards who carried her coffin. So this is a sketch of her. Supposedly, she died while falling asleep on this balcony. She fell asleep. She died. She didn't fall off, but she fell. She seemed to peacefully passed away in this position. In the mid-18th century, there were 5 small female communities that were established in Manila and its environment. So this is the listing given by Dr. Camacho in her essay on the Beateros and Recogimientos. She counted 5. Catalina de Siena, which was under the auspices of the Dominicans, Beatero de la Compañía, the Jesuits, San Sebastian de Calumpang, Recollect, and the Recollects, the Beatero de Recollects were very much promoted by these 2 sisters, Dionisia and Cecilia Talangpas. They moved in 1745 from Calumpit, village of San Sebastian de Calumpang, outside the walls of Manila, where the Recollects had a church and monastery, which is the present-day site of the San Sebastian Church. And the Recogimiento in Pasig and Saint Rose of Lima, the Recogimiento named after Saint Rose of Lima. And the illustration here by Jose Honorato Lozano depicts one of the nuns from that Beaterio and a student of hers. So that's the illustration. There are 5. Yvette was able to count 5 during the 18th century. So just to sum up, the evidence that that Father Schumacher presented of the maturing of Christianity was mainly the foundation of educational institutions, of hospitals, of natives incorporated into religious life, and communities founded by the natives. And if you will notice, many of these institutions, which is the university, the confraternities, and the beaterios, these were organizations in which the natives were not only just natives, but they were able to also mingle with Spanish, Chinese mestizos, and possibly even other races like what sometimes which they list as negros in the especially among the in the beaterios. There are some negras. They're what they're described in the documents as that. So you can see that in these institutions you have more interaction between people of different social classes and of different ethno-linguistic groups and even different races. The sources for this presentation are these: the Golden Age of the Philippine Church, Syncretism and Philippine Catholicism. These are 2 essays by Father Schumacher, Growth and Decline. La Literatura Filipina en Español durante la Era Barroca by Isaac Donoso, which in this he wants to emphasize that this is a very notable, the 1600s and the 1700s was a very notable time of production for Philippine literature. And then for a more substantial discussion on the Beaterios, there are several works. One of them is the one written by Yvette, Svetlana Camacho, who's the moderator of this panel, Beaterios and Recogimientos of the 18th century Manila, Religious Accommodation and Social Contribution. In this newly published book, More Hispanic Than We Admit, it was published just a few months ago. I also wasn't able to put in the listing the book of Luciano Santiago, which is To Love and to Suffer, and also the book Culture and History by Nick Joaquin, where Nick Joaquin really loves the Beatas and raved about them and really considers them to be a great mystical movement in the 17th century in the Philippines. I also got the statistics earlier given to you from Darren Robertson, and then the illustrations are from this book by Jose Honorato Lozano, Vistas de las Islas Filipinas y Trajes de sus Habitantes. You can get it online from the Biblioteca Nacional de España, and the Philippine map by Pedro Murillo Velarde. So that ends my presentation for today. So I talked about the evidence for the growing maturity in the church in the Philippines. And now I think we're going to already have a 5-minute break. I ended a bit early, so can have a 5-minute break now and come back after 5 minutes for the presentation of Josefti. Thank you very much for listening.
session of our webinar series. I'd like to thank Dr. Sophia Marco for her lecture. And now we will proceed to the second lecture for the day by Ms. Josefti Nito. Ms. Nito finished her MA in Humanities from the University of Asia and the Pacific and is currently pursuing, she's a PhD candidate in history at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. Her dissertation is about Marian devotions in Luzon in the 17th and 18th century, and I believe she will talk a bit about that in her presentation. Her current research project revolves around hagiographies, local devotions, and local histories in the Philippines. May I call on Ms. Josefti Nito.
Thank you, Dr. Camacho, for the introduction. Let me just share screen. So, good morning again, everyone. So we are in the chapter 7 of Father Schumacher's book, Readings in Philippine Church History, the Established Church 1620 to 1760. But as mentioned by Dr. Marco at the first part of this lecture, in his latter work, Growth and Decline, Father Schumacher adjusted this timeline, moved it to 1650 to 1768. Okay. Similar with Dr. Marco's lecture, I will be presenting, looking at indicators of that deeper faith. In this chapter, Father Schumacher also presents the socio-cultural effect of the evangelization of the established church. Okay, so I will start with the importance of the fiestas to the religious life in Manila and beyond it. According to Father Schumacher in his book Readings in Philippine Church History, there was no separation between religious and daily life in the Manila community of the 17th century. And to illustrate this, Father Schumacher quotes a very extensive report published in 1621 of a major feast in 1619. So let's just backtrack. What's the backstory for this big celebration of 1619? In 1617, the Pope at that time, Pope Paul V, approved the celebration in honor of the Immaculate Conception. So the approval was given 1617, but the good news arrived in Manila in 1619. So the celebration, because of that, there were big celebration in Manila at that year. So it was in honor of the Immaculate Conception, and as mentioned in this report, that it lasted for 15 days. Lasted for 15 days, which included celebrations, not just by the church, by the different religious orders, by the cathedral, but also that there were celebrations of the laity. There were several studies made about this celebration, this very beautiful celebration, and I'd like to use the study recently made by Feliz Prudente Santa Maria in her article, Transformative Interventions, Hispano-Christian Evangelization, 1565 to 1665. So this is also from the same book mentioned earlier by Dr. Marco, More Hispanic Than We Admit, which has the article of Dr. Camacho. If you're interested with the book, it's available in Fully Book. Feliz Prudente Santa Maria looked at this event But in her study, she cites Murillo Velarde and also an earlier study done by Father de la Costa. So, in Santa Maria's article, what she did was tabulate what happened. Okay, so I like her approach of tabulating it, which makes it more clear for us what happened. Okay, so she separates the morning activities, which are more solemn, and then the afternoon and evening activities. So the festivities began on Sunday in the cathedral with the solemn mass, and then from Monday onwards, the different religious orders will be participating in the celebration. So on Monday, December 9, the celebration was led by the Franciscan Fathers. And then, so there was a processional route from the Franciscan Church to the cathedral. Okay? Imagine this is all happening within the walls of Intramuros. Okay? In that small space, you have this big celebration, grand celebration with processions. So the procession is attended by His Majesty's Armed Forces of the Manila Garrison, and then there were also 8 groups of native dancers in symbolic costume representing different members of the different hierarchy in the church. In the afternoon, there would be plays. Okay, so for the Franciscans, it's the play on the Franciscan martyrs of Japan. And then on Tuesday, so the Augustinians take over, and similarly, there's again a procession from the Augustinian Church to the cathedral. Um, and then in the afternoon, there would be fireworks. And then there is also a showcase of native dances. On Wednesday, you have the celebration to be led by the Jesuits. Um, but in the but for the Jesuits, there was no procession. Then in the after another play on the Immaculate Concept, this time on the Immaculate Conception, and then on Thursday, the celebration is again led by the cathedral. On Friday, on Friday, the celebrations are led by the Recollect Fathers. And again, you have the similar processional route from Church of the Recollects to the Cathedral. Okay, and then um, but this time, if you notice, the procession by the Recollect Fathers is attended by the Master of Camp, His Excellency Don Jeronimo de Silva. And then in the afternoon, there's another parade, this time sponsored by the Colegio de San Jose, okay, which was mentioned earlier by Dr. Marco. And then you also still have Don Jeronimo de Silva, Master of Camp, participating, plus the brother of the Governor General, Don Luis Fajardo. So the celebration, okay, shows us a highly dynamic religious community in the 17th century Manila. Okay, so this is early 17th century Manila, and you can see that it's already very dynamic. Okay, and according to De La Costa, in his study about this celebration, he was saying that the fiestas were unofficial indices of social rank. Every order participated so that no one order could monopolize the entire celebration and acquire such right for the future. Actually, this quote is from the text itself, from the primary source itself. Um, According to Schumacher, when there are celebrations like this, the whole life of the colonial society was being brought to a halt. Okay. Later on, I just have to say it that later on, this would be criticized. This practice is not popular, um, even with everyone in the church. In 1747, the Archbishop of Manila, will write a critique on the many holidays of obligation and how everything stops for these holy days, and also with these big celebrations. According to going back to the article of Santa Maria, she says that the how the Spanish conducted their fiestas became the template for local renderings and interpretation. But as you so the how the Spanish the practice of the fiestas, okay, is something that we have inherited from the Spanish. But as you can see, just by looking at the events, okay, the activities throughout the fiesta of 1619, the celebration 1619, you will also see that there was space for folk art and creativity. Okay, and according to Feliz Santa Maria, um, the space for local art to be present in these celebrations will be more evident as you look at celebrations farther from Manila. Okay, so now we will now transition to the provinces. But as we transition to we will transition to the provinces by following a um, Marian procession. Okay, so I want to share with you my research on the fluvial processions of the Virgin of Antipolo in 1653 and 1748. So pasok siya dun sa time frame of this chapter by Schumacher. Okay, and later on I will further explain why I think this is very good to include in this presentation. So the fluvial procession of the Virgin of Antipolo. So the Virgin of Antipolo would often be borrowed for for the galleon ships. So she would often go down she brought down from Antipolo, and then will be taken, okay, with the galleon ships to serve as its protector. In 1653, after several travels with the galleon, it was decided that she should be returned to her shrine, to her home in Antipolo. So the return of the image of the Virgin of Antipolo, okay, includes a grand fluvial procession along the Pasig River. Okay, but because Antipolo is a mission site of the Jesuits, it was the Jesuits who took the lead role in this procession, in these festivities. And as you notice, the image will only stop in the Jesuit mission towns along the route. For example, this is a 1748 route. So they embarked on the boats and then will stop in San Pedro, Makati. And then the next stop would be in Cainta, and then Taytay, and then Antipolo. Okay, so this fluvial procession, and then but they when they reach Cainta, they continue on foot. So just to inform you of the source that I used here, I'll be citing an 1887 reprint of the 1847 Historia de la Virgen de la Paz y del Buen Viaje of Pedro Murillo Velarde. Okay, but actually, the content of this Historia is taken from his work Historia de la Provincia, which was published in 1749. Okay, so ang ultimate root talaga ng sources na to was 1749 work of Father Murillo Velarde. So the fluvial procession along the Pasig River, okay, and in this account, I like this comparison that he makes. Okay, so he compares the river into a theater. he says here, todo el espacio como un teatro de mayor concurrencia. The space was like a theater. Okay, so I like that comparison because it highlights the performativity of the of the of the of the procession. Okay, and then according to Father Murillo Velarde, okay, not only was it attended by people from Taytay, Cainta, Marikina, San Mateo, Pasig, Moron, Baras, Angono, and other surrounding towns, but there were also people who came from the provinces of Pampanga, Bulacan, Cavite, La Laguna, and from Tayabas, Batangas, and other remote provinces. Okay? So the fluvial procession, okay, the bringing home of the Virgin of Antipolo attracted people from all over Luzon. So this is why I wanted to talk about the procession of the Virgin Mary of Antipolo, okay? Because I think this best captures what Schumacher was saying in this chapter, that one of the transformations that we're seeing now is the pre-Hispanic societies, which were often um, exclusive and isolated from each other because oftentimes they're mutually hostile. What we're seeing now is a transformation to a to a bond of Christian brotherhood because of these religious um, festivals, okay, that attracts people from different towns. And in a way, we can see that with this festival, we are looking at a wider sense of community. So we've been talking about the pueblo, the creation, that community. But in this festival, we're seeing that beyond the pueblo, there is now a developing wider sense of community even beyond the pueblo. So I'm sorry that this is very small, and I put all the text there, text that is text heavy, but this is such a beautiful description of how the banks of the river look during the procession. Okay, so I won't read everything. Okay, so this is after he describes the what was happening in the river. So the river is full of boats, different sizes. Okay, participating, traveling with the Virgin along the river. And then he was saying the bank of the river would not be left behind in adoring the sacred image as it passes through. Okay, so the banks of this mighty river were filled with altars, flags, and flowers. So you have the ministers of the towns, waiting on the banks. Um, and then the many and beautiful villas of the Spaniards along the banks of the river were also filled with decorations and lights. And then there's also bells, drums, fireworks resounded everywhere, announcing this common and universal rejoicing. So the natives crowded in the houses and bridges along the banks of the river, that it seemed to be a continuous anthill. If they were not able to show their devotion in celebrating the Senora in their town, they accompanied her, running along in pursuit by land. Okay, so this is very nice to imagine. Okay, the Pasig River and the banks of the Pasig River, with such a solemn, and very festive, yet very festive activity, uniting the different towns along that route in that activity. On the road, so when they reach Cainta, they continue on foot. Okay? So this is 1748. Yung 1653, which was the first procession, took much longer because they stayed in Cainta and Taytay 3 days each in each town. But here they continued on, just stopped for short prayer, and then they continued on. Okay, so in 1748, there were three altars on the road. The first was made by Cainta, the second by Taytay, and the third by Antipolo. In competition, the towns endeavored to decorate them with hangings, images, lights, and other jewels, as well as various arches that were placed at length along the way. The entire field can be said to have been a spacious temple without doors. On the occasion of a great rejoicing, due to the innumerable attendees and fervent devotion that made the praises of Maria Santissima resound everywhere. Okay? Again, I highlighted this part wherein he says that the entire field um, can be compared to a church without doors, because of all of this, because of the altars, because of the prayer that was happening along the way. Okay, I like this description provided by Velarde, because I think in a way this captures um, the meeting of pre-Hispanic worship culture, worship practices, and the Christian worship practices. Okay, so in our pre-Hispanic tradition, a worship was done outside of a building. Okay, that animistic culture. So in a way, this was the meeting of two cultures. So, Schumacher, in his book Readings in Philippine Church History, says that it is evident how much the entire social and cultural life of the ordinary rural Filipino was permeated with religious practice, and how deeply the faith um, had been built into the community. Or we can also say that it was through the faith that the community was built. Wow. From this point on, so I'll be showing um, uh, sources from quoted by Schumacher that shows to us the religious life in the pueblo. So according to Murillo Velarde, okay, every day, the boys and girls up to 14 years old more or less hear Mass. Afterward, they sing all the prayers, then go to the school. At 10 o'clock, the bell is rung, and they go to the church to visit the Blessed Sacrament, where they recite the Salve to the Virgin, as well as the Alabado. According to in the footnote of Father Schumacher, this is a prayer to the Blessed Sacrament. Then they go out singing the prayers in procession to some cross within the town, and at 2 p.m., they return to the school. And at 4 or 5, they go back to the church where they recite the rosary, then go out in procession singing prayers. So it was mentioned by Dr. Marco earlier um, that during this time you also have the emphasis on educating the natives. Okay, so that's what we see here. One, and then second, I wanted to discuss this because I think try to imagine that this is happening every day. Okay? In a small town or in the cabecera at least. Okay? This is happening every day. Um, what kind of change is it creating, not just for the boys and girls who participate, but also for everyone in the cabecera or in the town who witness this, who hear this? In a way, okay, this is creating um another dimension as to how the time is seen throughout the day, is observed throughout the day. Okay? What I think is nagiging time marker throughout the day itong mga activities na to. Not just for the boys and girls who participate, but also for everyone in the town. Okay, so the church and its activities was also shaping how the people in the town um, would mark their day, would think of time throughout the day. Okay, and then certain days of the week would have certain activities also. Okay, for example, Saturday is a day devoted to the Virgin Mary, devotion to the Virgin Mary. Okay, and so here, Father Murillo Velarde talks about the role of the women, the congregantes who help the women congregantes. He says here at the end of the quote, the women congregantes sweep the church very early, adorn the statues, put roses and other flowers on the altars, and bring in burning perfumed incense. Okay, so that's for Saturday. And then, of course, for Sunday, okay, uh, on Sundays, the boys go out around town with a banner singing prayers to call the people together. The priest says the Mass, which the musicians accompany with instruments and voices. And afterwards, the whole town recites all the prayers together, as well as a brief series of questions and answers on the principal mysteries of faith and instruction on the manner of baptizing, which is called tuksuhan. Okay, so the post baptismal instruction happen also every time during Mass. Okay, the priest preaches a moral sermon, and ordinary calls the roll to see if the Indios or if anyone fails to attend Mass. Now, I just before I end with this part, okay, I just wanted to include this one also. When the time for giving birth is near, the women go to confession and communion and remain in the town. Thus, it is very rare that an Indio dies without the sacraments, except in the case of sudden accident. Because of the insistence of the parish priest, they are taught to call the father as soon as the sick person is in danger. Now, I included this, okay, because I wanted to highlight the word "remain in the town." Okay, in his work Growth and Decline, Father Schumacher mentions that um, there was a practice of having Sunday houses within the cabecera. Okay, so the cabecera is where they are nearest to the church. Okay, but as mentioned earlier by Dr. Marco, the town itself, the pueblo, could be very, very huge. So what happens was the natives would set up houses within the cabecera near to the church and would stay there over the weekend to be able to attend the Saturday and Sunday of religious activities. Okay, so what we're looking at is developments also within the town. Okay, eventually, many of these people would permanently stay in their houses within the cabecera. But at the beginning, the practice was the houses in the cabecera were simply their Sunday houses. In the provinces, okay, in the places far from Manila, according to Father Schumacher, there is this greater persistence of pre-Hispanic practices. Okay, and also, of course, the animistic practices also were a lot more present. Okay, but in this chapter, he focuses on two pre-Hispanic practices that the missionaries tried their best to really erase, which was slavery and the practice of bride service. In 1684, okay, in this document, 1684, a cedula of His Majesty King Philip III, dated August 8, 1609, ordered this royal audiencia to submit a report on this question, but nothing was apparently done about it. Referring to the practice of slavery and whether it is already abolished. For the practice of slavery in these various forms continued to the present. This is even if the earlier Synod of Manila has been very clear that this should already be abolished. Remember, in the pre-Hispanic societies, we have the aliping na mamahay and aliping sa gilid is part of that structure. Okay, so that was the social rank that they wanted abolished. Slavery, the aliping na mamahay and aliping sa gigilid. But even until 1609, it continues. For this reason, the promulgation of Your Majesty's Cedula of Emancipation of 1679 and the consequent freeing of many of these slaves caused such a disturbance among Your Majesty's native subjects. Okay? Sino to in particular? Of course, this would be the native elite, the Principalia. Okay, so they resisted the abolishment of the practice of aliping na mamahay and aliping sa gigilid. To whom the slaves belong, that your president and oidores were obliged to suspend the execution of said royal cedula insofar as it concerned the slaves of the natives pending your majesty's decision on the matter. Okay. I think this will be rooted out finally in the at least officially in the 18th century. Okay, but according to Father Schumacher, he thinks that in a way this has transitioned to the cacique system. Okay. Now, here, he's referring to Juan Francisco de San Antonio, a Franciscan, is referring to the practice of bride service. So, bride service happens when the family of the guy or of the man who wants to get married could not pay yet or in full the bigay kaya or the dowry. So, if the men do not have the means with which to buy them immediately, innumerable sins follow, both of them living in sin, even with the knowledge of parents themselves. The young men acting as servants in the house, but being passed off as sons to cover up and justify what is evil. Great efforts are being made to abolish this diabolical abuse, but much effort is still needed. Under the name Katipados, which is a name given to those who are engaged to be married, they live in legitimate concubinage all the time that they do not have what is needed for the bigay kaya. Okay, so this was a lot more difficult to uproot. Okay, unlike polygamy. Okay, so polygamy, it was much easier in a way to uproot compared to this practice of 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 bride service. So from this point on, I will be talking about the social and cultural effects or implications of the established church. Okay, so what were the contributions, significance, okay, to society and culture outside of the realm of faith. Okay? It was the missionaries who produced not only the first religious books, but they were also the ones who produced the first dictionaries, grammars, and other aids to learning the vernaculars. So, in chapter 7, Father Schumacher cites a 19th century source which talks about the different, which summarizes the role of the missionaries in the production of in the production of dictionaries, grammars in the local languages. Okay, so here are several examples. You have the Arte de la Lengua Tagala by Fray Sebastian Totanes, first published in 1745. And then you have the Vocabulario de la Lengua Tagala, first published in 1703. And then also a Vocabulario de la Lengua Tagala by Fathers Noceda and Sanlúcar. Okay, but Tagalog was not the only language that was extensively studied and written about. Okay, so there were also vocabularios written for the different languages. So the primary intention for the vocabulario is to help the missionaries, but its consequence outside of that was the vocabularios help standardize the Tagalog language. It helped preserve the Tagalog language and standardize the Tagalog language, which was otherwise very oral in nature. Okay, so by writing it down, creating vocabularios and on the grammar books, the missionaries help standardize the language. Other examples would be Father Alonso Mentridas, Arte de la Lengua Bisaya for Hiligaynon, 1637. And then I've shown this to you in my earlier presentation 2 webinars ago. The Arte de la Lengua Iloca, okay, the Ilocano language by Fray Francisco Lopez, which, as we said, was done with the help of a local native elite uh, uh, by Don Pedro Bucanig. But the most Father Schumacher highlights the publication and the writing of the Passion. Okay, so in his work, Growth and Decline, he explains that the Passion was very important for the deepening of the faith of the natives. One, because there were no published Tagalog sacred scriptures at that time. So the Passion and the story of Christ's life in the Passion and a glimpse also of the New Testament was the closest that the natives could get to the Bible, to the stories of the sacred scripture, particularly the New Testament. So this one is already from the Zuniga in the 19th century. He says, both men and women are much attached to reading verses. They represent them dramatically as they read them and are tireless in this. Every night during Lent, passing through the streets, one can be sure to hear the Pasión de Nuestro Señor Jesucristo recited in verse in many houses. A Franciscan father, seeing this inclination of theirs, put in verse for them and had it printed, though it is well done, and they themselves admit the verse lively and well written, they do not wish to read this one, but rather other Pasiones, which they have made themselves full of fables, which they like very much because they emphasize the marvelous, something which they especially enjoy. These fables do not contain anything against religion. So this is already a critique coming in the 19th century. Okay, one of the earliest earliest passion to be published is from Gaspar Aquino de Belen. Okay, and and in this edition, in his version of the Passion, according to Father Schumacher, you can see folk elements entering in the narrative, and and I suppose it's these folk elements that have grown, okay, that have grown to. I think this is what Father Zuniga was referring when he said they're full of fables, okay, which they like very much because they emphasize the marvelous. Okay, one important study on this on the Passion came uh, uh, was the work of Ray Ileto, Passion and Revolution. Okay, this is a very interesting study. He looks at the Passion in the 19th century, particularly the Passion Pilapil. Okay, so this version dates only from 1814. Okay, but because of its widespread circulation in various languages, so it was translated in various languages, and then it has a narration of the whole Bible story from creation to the apocalypse, and indicated influence it had on the millenarian and or nationalist movements of the latter part of the 19th century. So in this study, Ray Ileto the looks at how the Passion influences the consciousness, the mentality of the Filipinos, okay, and how that is seen in the millenarian and nationalist movements of the 19th century. So the church also played a major role in helping the ordinary Filipino improve his methods of agriculture so as to be able to live a more decent human life. Okay? So, helping or training the natives on farming, on agriculture, was intimately tied to the evangelization. Okay, to the needs of the evangelization. Um, uh, citing the Augustinian Father Mozo, it says here, because of this way of life, it is necessary to take measures to provide those who are converted with the necessary means of sustenance. Lest for the lack of it, they go wandering about. So if they saw that for the natives to stay in these new settlements, they have to be taught agriculture. As soon as baptisms begin, the missionaries look for work animals for them and everything else necessary for agriculture. They also help. They also help um, maximize local products. Okay, so for example, he mentions in this. He mentions here, anil or indigo. Okay, it's already in the Philippines, but the natives didn't know how to maximize it, how to use it. Okay, and then here he cites coffee, okay, which already existed in the islands, but the Indios knew nothing of its virtue and excellence. Okay, and it was the religious with their practical observations and counsels who taught the parishioners and helped which those little grains of so valuable a tree contain. Okay, so it was them who helped cultivate, okay, and how to form plantations, okay, and transplant the coffee plants, spacing them at proper distances and cleansing them of insects. Okay, so now, though this is not covered by Father Schumacher, Okay, I think it's good to mention that in 1745 to 1746, some Tagalog towns became involved um, in in revolts. Okay, they would be the revolts of 1745 to 1746 would be known collectively as the agrarian revolt, and so in according to the article, to the study of Fernando Palanco published in the Philippine Studies Journal, the problem with how we study the agrarian revolt of 1745 to 1746 is because for a long time the sources that the historians were using were very limited. So most of the sources, most of the commentaries on this revolt would rely on the um, 1751 document wherein the word usurpation was used um, in reference to the friars, to the missionaries. Okay, so from from that one document, the agrarian revolt is often seen, the cause for the agrarian revolt is often simplified into an issue of the friars usurping communal lands of the natives. But according to Palanco, who looked at several other sources, okay, several other Spanish sources, he said that this is a more complex issue than that. Okay, it's made complex by several things, which he saw when he looked at all of these different documents. First, he says that when we look back to this period, okay, we should recognize that there was changing demographics during this time. And so this was not just a conflict between the missionary orders versus the natives. Okay? So there is a lot more happening there. You have the principalia, the principalia, and then also you have new um, new new characters in this conflict. I don't know if character is maybe not the right word, such as the rising Chinese and mestizo class. Okay, so within among the natives themselves, you have that conflict. And then, so that's one. And then second, this should also be put in the context of the Bourbon reforms, wherein there was high demand for more earnings to go to the crown. Okay, and then the third point of Palanco, which is how he ends his article, was that one way of looking at this event also is to highlight an, the rise of new protagonists, okay, which are the Filipino secular clergy, okay, which will be discussed in the next webinar by Dr. Dumol, who will talk about the Filipino secular clergy. Okay, so just before I end, just a little conclusion. So I had a hard time thinking of how to conclude this chapter, but in the end, I wanted to focus on the natives. So this is the established church, 1620 or 1650 to 1768. During this time, what was it for the natives? Okay, what is this period for the natives? And from what I have studied, what I've seen, what I've presented, these are the things that I wanted to highlight. During this time, one, you have there is a development for a wider sense of community beyond the pueblo now. Okay, and then there was also growth in folk art and creativity. Admittedly, I feel like the folk art and creativity was practiced in a limited field of faith. Okay, but still, it was not silenced. Okay, folk art and creativity became part of this religious life. And then also, of course, you, as I've mentioned, standardization of language, and then also development in agriculture. Just before I end, I wanted to share some of the links that helped me with some of the sources. So you have the Filipinas Heritage Library. They have a nice collection of old photos and also many 19th century publications. And then, of course, you have the digital library of UST. They have what you call the heritage collection. So if you're interested in the different vocabularios which I showed earlier, they're available in the UST digital library. Okay, and then the photos which showed also by Dr. Camacho, Dr. Marco, they can be found in the Biblioteca Nacional de España, their digital library. And then also this Hati Trust Digital Library has a good collection of Filipiniana. And with that, I end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nita, for your lecture. Thank you again, Dr. Marco, for your lecture earlier. We will proceed to the open forum. But before that, I would like to remind the participants to answer the evaluation form, where you can also write down your questions if they go unanswered or if you have to leave. I think the chat box has been activated. The link to the evaluation form should be posted there, and so you may post your questions in the chat box. We just give it a few moments, for people to think and write. So the link to the evaluation form has been posted. So many expressions of gratitude for your presentations, Dr. Marco, Ms. Nito. All right, so we'll start now. So the first question has come up. So this is from Joseph Renta. Was there any mention of the building of the Baroque churches during that time? Suppose mention in the sources. All right, yes, Dr. Marco.
The one, this chapter of Father Schumacher, he doesn't put so much of the building of churches. That's Sir Renta, no? He's from San Beda, right? You're from San Beda, right? Sorry, we don't have so much on the building of the churches. Sorry, we didn't add. Maybe we should have, but yeah, we didn't make extra research on that. Sorry. He didn't put excerpts on the building of churches in this chapter. Actually, in the book, not so much.
All right. So this is from Dana Kalantuan Mejos. I'm just curious. So the question is for Ms. Nito. I'm just curious how active or what are the contributions of the Chinese Catholics in the religious parades?
Thank you, Danes, for the question. This, I think, is still very early in the history of the conversion of the Chinese. So if you notice in the in the big Marian Fiesta feast of 1619, the Chinese were cited as the source for the fireworks. Okay, so and then second, in the fluvial procession of the Antipolo, diba, I looked at two, 1653 and then 1748. In the 1653, they're not mentioned as participants. Okay, but again, just sources for the fireworks. And then actually in 1653, interesting, they mentioned the Sangli Revolt. I think the Sangli Revolt was still very fresh in their memories at that time. Okay, and then but in 1748, he already mentions the Chinese being part of the procession, especially along the river. Their sampans were part of the procession. Okay, so that's how I encountered them in the processions, in my study of the processions.
If I may ask, I will not type in my question anymore, but during my session, somebody asked about the Passion. Now, since you mentioned it here, the question was, why was the Passion, like, why did it write in Luzon, in contrast with the Visayas? So I think now the Passion that we know are Tagalog, mainly. I don't know if you would have a background on that.
Actually, Father Schumacher mentions that there were also Passion in Bisaya. But he's not sure if it was published. So I think in terms of publication, it was really the Tagalog Passions who were extensive and known.
All right, thank you. So now there is a question for Dr. Marco. Did the Santa Clara nuns eventually admit indigenous women? And if so, when did they do that?
I did not. Hey, Yvette, can you answer that question? Like, at what point did they? I'm sure they did. It's just that I don't know exactly at what point. But as of our time frame today, wala. They're not. They're not admitting as of before 1768. So I don't know at what point they started admitting natives. So, Yvette, do you know?
I think
For Santa Clara?
in the work of Luciano Santiago, he mentioned that earlier, I mean, before the time frame that you've taken up, I think some mestiza women were admitted, but that was it. After that, they stopped. But I don't remember now the reasons, or if there were any reasons. I mean, at least that we. So this is another question. Donatos were mentioned as neither members of religious orders nor lay. Are they similar to modern day tertiaries of religious orders?
Yeah, I think the thing is, I think the tertiaries of religious orders now, they really have a specific sort of policy or rule regulation that they follow. The thing is with the Donados, I think walang ganon. So I think that's why the terminology was used for them. I think they were just closer to the religious community, but no, as Father Schumacher saying, no canonical basis. So walang juridical papers, wala. So I guess it's because these people were so zealous that I think it's an evidence to me of the interest of the native. Kasi parang wala pa kayong configuration. You are the ones, we have no configuration for you. However, you are the ones who are presenting yourselves to be here, be of assistance, and in fact, to initiate many things. So I guess the way I imagine it to be is that beyond what was legally possible, the Donados were already a reality, beyond what could be contained within the existing laws at religious laws at that time. So that's what happened, I think. So ganun yung reality nila dun.
So that question was from Christian Conrad Villegas. No? So next question is from Shai. That's a nickname. So if the women in the Beaterio were not considered nuns, did they become nuns eventually? Or their community just continued as women living a common life?
Yvette, ikaw na lang yan.
They could not become nuns. I mean, that was precisely the crown was very strict about the foundation of new convents. So they remained as beaterios or even more late, the recogimientos. So yes, so the answer would be that they just continued as women living a common life, with no, shall we say, a proper canonical status. For Ms. Nito, this is from Antonio Gana. She mentioned lots of information, but when we need more explanation about the Passion y Revolution, what were they for? I guess referring to the Passion, were they able to rouse the people to revolt? Did the Spaniards accept that?
Okay, thank you, Antonio, for pointing that out. So the Passion and Revolution, which is a work actually of Ileto. This one is really recent, right? So what Ileto did was study the Tagalog Passion, especially the Passion Pilapil. Okay, and for Ileto, okay, the Passion played an important role in how the Tagalogs, okay, looked at the revolution, okay, or justified their role in the revolution. Okay, so it's really a study of how that reading influenced consciousness. Okay, so I just wanted to include that, okay, because of it. Well, it was also mentioned by Father Schumacher in his work. Okay.
Thank you. So this is from Arjun Plasana. Thank you for this wonderful lecture. About the number of fiestas mentioned in document 18, around 121 fiestas, did the Spaniards make an effort to reduce this number of feasts since it's considered detrimental to the economy since there's no servile work on those days?
Actually, I don't know if there is actual if they really tried to lessen this, but as I've mentioned, in 1747 there was the Archbishop noticed that this was too much. Okay, so he really saw that this was, as you said, detrimental to the economy. But the document was a consulta, so I don't know if from that it transitioned to an actual decision to lessen the fiestas.
Yeah, masyadong na daw madami.
So now from Mary Rajeline Guzmente, right? Were there archival records on the cases of Ihas that bore children from the friars? I suppose this, yes.
Just to share, we asked this. Okay, I asked a similar question. Okay, Josefti and I, 2 years ago, we went to a conference in Naga for in many religious orders, scholars from many religious orders were there, and I asked a question of, Father, how about those erring friars? How about those erring friars? What's going to happen to them? And he goes, oh, because the erring friars are real, but the thing is, we will never give you the records on that because it's about our sins. Why should we share you with you? But of course, there is no institution. That's what they really said. There's no institution that is perfect, and therefore, there are there are a lot of erring friars, but we will not. These are matters of conscience, which we will not put in public. The thing is, I think there's some kind of input we can still figure out because there's oral histories in the towns, and then there's also baptismal records of the which you can ask Yvette. I'm telling you this because when I was researching the family background of my lolo, his mother was baptized but padre no conocido, and the oral history was that it was probably the friar, which was the father. But of course, I did not anymore make additional research to confirm. I just would hear about it in the family because there were several of her own sisters were also padre de as in the aunties of my grandfather were also padre no conocido. But maybe Yvette, do you have additional input on that?
Mm, not really. I would know that yes, no, the religious orders would have their own, should we say, processes. No?
Yeah, that's what they said. Because we kind of asked them point blank, like, okay, what do you do to the friars who do this, who do all sorts of evils, not only when it comes to chastity, but other also evils. But they said, oh, we will not share that with you because those are matters of conscience. You don't make that available to the public. That's true. So, what's next?
All right. Well, it's 12 o'clock. Well, and there are maybe I think about 5 questions. Would you want to take them or?
Sige. Anyway, we usually end later, di ba?
Yes. Well, those who have to leave now at 12, just do another reminder to fill out the evaluation form. The link has been posted. Thank you very much for participating in this 5th session. We hope to see you next week for this session on Philippine clergy in the 18th and 19th centuries. So we will proceed now with the next questions. So from Charles Talavera. Magandang hapon po. Magandang hapon na, no? Maraming salamat po sa makabuluhang lektura. Nais ko pong itanong kung ano po ang nagdahilan sa pagpapaalis ng mga Jesuita sa Pilipinas. Maraming salamat po.
Okay. What's his name? Charles?
Talavera.
Hey, Charles, you know what? This is a long story. Pero, sige, simplified answer na lang. Also because I looked at this several years ago, but I don't remember exactly, but here goes. So this is connected to the effort to increase the authority of the kings. So these are the development of the idea of absolute monarchy sa Europa. Sa Europa may mga pananaw tungkol sa monarkiya na dapat ang monarkiya ang kokontrol ay maghahawak sa lahat ng kapangyarihan sa isang estado. So lumalakas na ang mga monarkiya. So yan is the idea of absolute monarchy. Now, absolute monarchy by the 1730s was already coupled with the idea of enlightened monarchy. That means that the monarch has to be enlightened, but he also has to control the state with the church within his territory. Noon kasi, medyo nagko-cooperate ang church and state sa Europa. So bago ito mag-French Revolution na nagrevolusyon ng mga tao sa France and they were able to weaken the church. But this is before the French Revolution, have the effort of the monarch in different countries in Europe to strengthen the power of the king himself. And strengthen the power of the king means to control the church. And at a certain point in Portugal and in Spain, and I think that the seed was in Portugal, wherein one of the kings really said, I want to weaken the Jesuit order. And even as the king in Spain decided that if I'm going to weaken the church in my area, dapat I will be able to control the Jesuit order. So in several monarchies in Europe, the Jesuit order was targeted, and several cases were brought against them in the both in the before the state and also before the Pope. So there were a series of attacks on the Jesuit order in Europe, and the Pope decided, okay, upon pressure of several monarchs, decided that the Jesuit order will be dissolved. And with that, there was a papal order, and that papal order reached the Philippines in 1768. So because of that, the Jesuit order was dissolved, and they had to be either not no longer exist as a community. So either to go home, to cease to be priests, or to join another order of religious. So it's a very complicated story which began in Europe and also was resolved in Europe. That's why the Jesuit order came back into existence.
Thank you. So the next question is from Almira Tumimay. Was the Tagalog Passion existing as oral tradition before it was documented? If yes, what would be their source of the verses if no Tagalog Bible existed at that time?
What I've encountered in Father Schumacher's work is that the first Tagalog Passion the first Passion were translations of the Spanish work. So that was how they become familiarized with the content of the Passion, because these were translations of from the original Spanish. So I don't think that there was an oral tradition for the Passion prior to those translations.
Okay, the next is from Christopher Esquejo. Can we conclude that friars somehow were resisting the full implementation of teaching the Spanish language to the natives because there were already numerous dictionaries and grammar books done by various religious orders by the 17th century? Thank you and congratulations to the speakers.
That Christopher. Yeah, in a way, no. In a way, it's a form of resistance, but I think the resistance is based on their experience of their experience on the ground. Kumbaga, parang here comes the order from outside, ordering the teaching of Spanish, but the reality on the ground is that why would native learn a language he will not use every day? No, so I think it's a resistance that, in a way, has its justification. But yeah, it could be seen as resistance in some way, in a kind of perspective. Yeah, if you were more seeing the friar as a resistor of a royal order, yeah, to a certain extent it can be said. But it sounds so negative. But yeah, in a way. But I think it was a resistance due to a practical way of thinking. Yeah. What is practical? So it's practical to resist these kinds of impositions from the king. That's my perception of the whole situation.
Okay, I'll read the comment from Mr. Aped Santos. Thank you very much. I'm 60 years old and I'm an Antipolo devotee. Only now I realize about the actual fluvial parade connection between the Manila Acapulco galleons and the Virgin in the Antipolo Hills. And from Antonio M. Gana. The fiestas were lessened by President Marcos. Oh, okay, this is in response to the other. After he declared martial law. Okay. Spain celebrates lots of fiestas, and so did we. In fact, lots of practices were developed in fiestas, like honoring the saints, like Pantluluwa and Batangas. All right. I think this will have to be the last question. Okay, from Chang. Very informative presentation. Is this also the time where they built schools in the provinces? And how were they able to convince the locals that these buildings are necessary when there was not enough financial resources locally?
What's that again?
So the question is about the building of schools in the provinces. How were they able to convince the locals that the buildings are necessary when were not enough financial sources locally?
Oh, I don't. I don't know so much about the building of. I think the building of schools was maybe it was already in existing school buildings for most of the for the century we're covering. I think they were just using the same school building. I think the building of new schools would happen in the 1800s na lang. That's my um that's the way, because you know why these articles on building of schools in the Philippines are all 19th century. The earlier ones were all like it's uneven, depends on the parish priest, and then even the content of what is taught is also depending on the parish priest. So nothing standardized as of the time period we're dealing with now. So I think the 19th century, that's when I think these mga escuelas piyas would have their separate structure, mga ganon. Mukhang 19th century lang sila itatayo. Parang ganon yung mga dates.
Right. All right. So I think with that, we can end this session. Thank you very much to our speakers, Dr. Sophia Marco and Ms. Josefti Nito.
Ayan. For those,
thank you very much.
Tell them, if you like a copy of the lecture, diba, you have to put it in the evaluation, something like that.
Yes. Please indicate if you wish. You'll have to indicate your request on the evaluation form.
In the evaluation, yeah.
And
okay.
Yes.
Kasi we can make naman our evaluation, our lectures available. Kasi yung akin medyo mabigat, so Google Drive na lang.
All right. Yes, thank you. So we hope to see you next week. The topic will be the Filipino clergy in the 18th and 19th centuries. So good afternoon and also have a good lunch.
God is telling all of us right now, whoever you are, wherever you are, be still and know that I am God.
So how will you recognize a true Christian? The true Christian is always grateful. The favorite word of the true Christian is thank you. Because for the true Christian, everything is a gift.
When you die to yourself, forget yourself, and give yourself as a gift to another person, that, my friend, is when you taste authentic, permanent joy.
This is FaithWatch TV, today's leading Catholic online TV. We at FaithWatch create all original content ranging from reflections from the Church's bishops and priests, lessons on catechesis, testimonies of your favorite inspirational speakers, talk shows, and news programs. Powered by Areopagus Communications, FaithWatch TV aims to deliver to you the best and the latest inside and around the Catholic Church, neatly packaged for the Filipino Catholic. FaithWatch TV, today's leading online TV, your Catholic channel.